You want a fighter pilot to do something, tell them that it's impossible. And that's exactly what I set out to do, was to get back in the cockpit.
Welcome to the Alternative Flight Plan podcast, where we explore the healing paths your regular medical provider might not tell you about. With over 2 decades of naval service, I've really learned that creativity and adaptability are key to solving really complex problems, especially when it comes to healthcare. My guest today is a very special friend of mine. He's a former Navy F-18 Hornet pilot, and he's author of the newly released book, Phoenix Revival: The Aftermath of Naval Aviation's Fastest Survived Ejection. I can't wait to dig into that. Please welcome Lieutenant Kegan Gill, call sign Smurf. Smurf actually stands for Scrappy Motherfucker, so that should give you an idea of how he's managed to not only survive, but thrive, considering his absolutely unbelievable story. If there's a poster child for not only resilience, but the overlap between conventional medicine and alternative therapies, it's definitely Smurf. He wouldn't be here without both of those. So without further ado, Smurf, let's taxi to the cat and get airborne. Welcome.
All right, let's go. Thanks for having me on the show.
Pleasure
to be here.
I'm psyched to have you. It works out for both of us. I am a fledgling podcast person, and you have a book that you want to promote. So it works out well for both of us. For the audience, real quick, Smurf and I met in February of 2023 at a retreat in Costa Rica, where No Fallen Heroes, the organization that I work for, sent us down there to do Iboga. And I got to hear firsthand a lot of what's in the Phoenix Revival. Smurf, we don't need to rehash the whole thing, because I want people to go read your book, but let's get some highlights. Tell me a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, it's been a wild journey, to say the least. But in short, I was, as you talked about a little bit earlier, I was at one point a F-18 Super Hornet pilot, and when I was 28 years old, still a young lieutenant, still figuring out the role of the new guy in the squadron. Really, I'd only been there for about 8 months. I had an ejection. I had an aircraft go out of control on me, and I had to eject at nearly the speed of sound, going 695 miles per hour. And it just so happened it was an icy cold January day, near freezing water temperatures. We were joking just before the flight that there was a 16-foot, 3,500-pound great white shark named Mary Lee directly underneath the airspace I was going to be flying in that day, that my friend found on the Shark Tracker app. So it was sort of, it went very quickly from having the dream job of doing what I had worked to do for so long to very quickly turning into a nightmare of ejecting at nearly the speed of sound, which caused extensive injuries, from traumatic brain injury, a broken C1 in my neck, left scapula was shattered, bilateral humerus fractures, a torn brachial artery in my right arm. My left forearm was shattered, the radius and ulna, severed the median nerve that controls a good portion of the left hand, extensive nerve damage in my upper body. It was so fast, it ripped my helmet off, it shredded open my dry suit, shredded all the survival gear, my radio, all the signaling equipment off of my vest. Not that I could have used any of it with my arms completely useless. My legs flailed, and that, impacting the speed of sound, it was 100 times the force of a Category 1 hurricane, just impacting my body instantaneously, and it turned me into a rag doll. That shattered my lower legs, both the tib fib and both my lower legs were shattered with open fractures. And I had just a few seconds in that parachute that it had time to open before I plummeted in the icy cold ocean. And there I had the next 2 hours I just spent fighting for my life. I was fortunately rescued by a helicopter, put into a level 1 trauma center, where I spent the next 2 weeks undergoing over a dozen different trauma surgeries. They had to do fasciotomies to salvage all 4 of my extremities. They rebuilt my skeleton out of titanium rods and steel plates. So I have like a no kidding Wolverine skeleton right now. Not to mention a lot of extra screws in there, and maybe a few that I've lost from the upstairs. But they put me back together, and I came to, and they told me, you've been in this high speed ejection. Between the head injury and all the medications I was on, I was very confused to where I was or what had happened. But eventually the medical staff explained, hey, you've been in a high speed ejection. You're lucky to be alive. Um, but you're likely never going to walk again. We don't think you'll ever use your arms and hands again. And your military flying career is over. And that sort of lit a fire in me. That's, if you want to tell a fighter pilot they can't do, or you want a fighter pilot to do something, tell them that it's impossible. And that's exactly what I set out to do, was to get back in the cockpit. I was just gonna say it was a long journey, and I won't get into all the details now, but it's been a wild path to healing and transformation that's led me here to speak with you today.
It's almost hard for me to imagine. One of the things that led me to Costa Rica and doing a boga with you back in February of 2023 is that I ended up in the ER after a really bad bike accident. And it wasn't that I woke up in the ER, but I was awake during the ambulance ride, and but sitting in the ER with a collar around my neck with 6 broken ribs and a collapsed lung internal bleeding was enough to really make me question my life, and was I gonna make it through, and would I need emergency surgery and all those things. So it really makes you face your mortality. What was it? Because one of the things I'm really interested in is psychologically how you've been able to come. Like, physically, you're a fucking miracle, man. But psychologically, it's even crazier because of the severe emotional traumas that must have gone on with the combined trauma of the traumatic brain injury. Walk us through some of the psychology that you've worked with over the last couple of years and coming back to be the you that's here.
Yeah, I remember when I was paralyzed like that and they told me I would never walk or use my arms and I would never fly F-18s again. There was a moment that I had that I now can look back at. I didn't totally recognize it in the moment, but I made a conscious decision in that moment. There was this huge raging inferno of all this darkness that was going on. From I just crashed an $89 million Super Hornet into the ocean. How responsible am I going to be for that? My body is destroyed. My brain is not working properly. Like, my whole life had just collapsed in on me. And I had every reason to just bite off on all of that pessimism, negativity, the fact that I wasn't going to be able to walk or use my arms again. And I could have just stayed in that place. But I made a very crucial mindset change in that moment, which was, there was also this little tiny ember of hope, which was, what if I could get back to flying? What if I could come back into this hospital with my flight suit on and my wings on my chest and say, hey, look at me. And that was the little ember that I started to feed my energy into. And I didn't just visualize it. I would close my eyes and see myself getting back in the cockpit. And how was I going to get there? And I visualized that path. But what it really came down to was, one, having that hope and inspiration, but then every day having the discipline and the consistent effort of working towards that goal to get my body back, and to get my mind working properly, so that I didn't just get crushed by all that darkness.
Where does that come from? like, because I'm looking, I can imagine you're just a broken mess on the hospital table, and you're already going, I'm gonna fly, not just walk again, because they told you you weren't gonna walk again, but not only am I gonna walk again, but I'm gonna go through the rigorous wickets that naval aviation requires for me to get an upshit and fly again. I suspect that a lot of folks who do what we do know what that kernel is. But I was hoping maybe you could describe it for us. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think there was a fire within me from a young age. I went through pretty traumatic events as a young boy that I think in part led me into the world of naval aviation. Was this desire to prove myself that kind of stemmed from that traumatic event, that I needed to prove my worth in the world. And so I had this fire from that I think led me into naval aviation. And then I also think that same fire was what was reignited when I decided to try to get that back. It was like, I need to prove that I can do that. I need to prove my worth. I'm not going to just have this be the end of me. And so I kind of had that bit of fire in me, I think, all along, but it was definitely cultivated over a life of facing challenging situations that oftentimes these really hard times and really hard challenges can either crush you or bring out the best parts of you. And I guess in a way, I'm grateful that I've been through a lot of hardship and challenging situations, because it's allowed me to cultivate those, better parts of humanity from within myself.
That's a tough road, because I think some of the biggest lessons that we can get in life come through the greatest suffering, which nobody really wants to do. But when you look at it in retrospect and you start integrating those things, you realize how important the suffering or the challenge was to get you to hone the sword, if you will, and it keeps you moving forward in a way that has grace, that's graceful.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, to go through so much challenge and hardship and darkness, I had every reason to come out the other side depressed and bitter and negative and pissy. Um, but to allow that to pass and to turn it into something positive, that's grace. And, and going through a lot of stuff like that has kind of forced me to discover that grace within myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think the hardest part of your journey we haven't talked about yet. And people are like, okay, so you ejected from an aircraft at 695 miles an hour. Your body was a mess. You now are a titanium Wolverine guy walking around, and that's not the hardest part. Why don't you walk us through the next steps of what happened in your journey?
So yeah, that's the truth. You would think that's like the hardest part of it all. Over the course of 2 years, undergoing more surgeries, overcoming prescription drug addiction, going through a FNAB, an investigation of that mishap, gaining a stack of medical waivers that was a miracle in itself. I was able to return to the cockpit of the F-18 as an active duty pilot. And this is sort of where the happy ending Disney version of my story would be. But as you alluded to, this is actually where the most challenging part of my journey started. Once I returned to the cockpit, feeling good physically, feeling good mentally, I started to have little lapses, likely a result of the residual brain injury that I had sustained, but it was mostly little stuff that I was able to just brush off. I had a flight after I'd been back flying for about a year and a half where the pressurization system uh, randomly fluctuated. It had been an issue in the Hornet and Super Hornet community at that time, to the point where they started putting hyperbaric treatment facilities on the aircraft carriers so that they could treat pilots as they came and aircrew as they came back from missions to deal with that type 2 decompression sickness, which is, for those that don't know what that is, basically if you get decompressed very quickly, you can think of a soda bottle when you open the top and you can see the carbon dioxide fizzle out of the top. Well, it's sort of the same thing can happen from your blood if you decompress very quickly. Scuba divers can get this if they come up from depth too quickly, but basically the nitrogen that's in solution within our blood can come out of solution and form these little bubbles. Now, if you get those in your joints, it's called type 1 decompression sickness, the bends, it's achy joints sort of thing. But you can get those little bubbles and they can block blood flow to your brain and cause brain damage. And this can give you really serious, or it can even kill you if it's severe enough. So this was something that was plaguing the F-18 community at that time. I came back from a flight. I was not quite right. My memory was gone. I had become insomniac. I could not sleep. I could not rest. My nervous system was just cranked up to 11. I was just fight or flight all the time. Even when I got back to my quiet hotel room, nothing going on, peaceful and quiet, sitting on my bed, it felt like I was about to just be bombarded with some sort of tragedy. I was just freaking out for no reason. I started having panic attacks, which I had never experienced. I started having vertigo, which I had never experienced. I sat down on the bed and it felt like the room tumbled over me. And I didn't know what was going on exactly, but I contacted the squadron safety officer and said, "Hey, here's what's going on." They made the game time decision. Hey, there's a dive base nearby where we were doing our detachment for in Wessup, live fire missile exercise down at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. And fortunately, they drove me to that dive base like 20 minutes away and got me into a hyperbaric treatment facility very quickly. I spent the night getting squeezed in that pressure chamber. And the next day I felt a little bit better, but there was something still not right. I still couldn't sleep. I was still nervous and panicked and like just not myself. My memory had gotten really bad, and my cognitive abilities had been drastically diminished. Like I was having trouble putting together like 3-letter words, playing like words with friends with my buddy on the ride home from that detachment. So something was not right still. And when I got back to Lemoore, where I was stationed at that point in California, I kind of reluctantly went in to see the flight surgeon because I knew something was not right. And I knew that there was a good chance that if I did go in and seek help, that it might be the end of my career. But I knew I was in a mental place where I could not safely operate an F-18 at that point. And I didn't want something bad to happen again because I ignored it. And it had just become too big to ignore any longer. And so when I went in, that's unfortunately the struggle that we face in that kind of community is you jeopardize your medical clearance, you jeopardize your security clearance potentially anytime you want to bring up something that has to do with mental health. And while a lot of times you could do something proactive and optimize the brain health early on and it wouldn't be a problem, but oftentimes people just bury this stuff until it becomes a bigger problem and something serious happens. But uh, anyways, all that being said, I went into the flight surgeon very reluctantly and cautiously and pretty quickly got a delayed onset PTSD diagnosis. And they really bit off on that PTSD diagnosis and started to treat it through the conventional means of seeing the psychology department to do things like cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, all that sort of stuff. A lot of it was just done with apps on my phone, which I found incredibly frustrating because it was sort of presented like, hey, this is just something in your head. This is just an emotional issue that you're unable to get over. And from being from that community, we get we get really good at compartmentalizing everything and moving forward. Even when we're having emotional struggles, we're very good at shutting that emotion down and doing what we need to do to get the job done. Um, so to be told that I was just having this emotional thing that I wasn't being able to handle was infuriating to me. Like how I was so mad at myself. Like, why can't I just get over this? Well, the real thing that was going on is the underlying issue of a brain injury was present. I had a brain injury that was now exacerbated by a decompression sickness. And so I had a brain injury on top of a brain injury. But instead of addressing the physiological problem within my brain, which was the cells were damaged, the neurons were damaged, things were not working properly in my brain. The hardware was damaged. Instead, we were just doing software updates. We were doing this therapy, and before long, that frustration led to pharmaceutical drugs again for dealing with PTSD, which don't do anything to actually address the underlying condition. They don't do anything to help heal the brain. All they did was mask the symptoms temporarily. But as time went on, I needed more and more of those medications. And the same thing that I saw happen with my pain management, where before I knew it, I was on dozens of pain meds. Now I'm getting all these different, antipsychotic medications, SSRIs, all this stuff to help me sleep. And I got worse and worse as time went on, to the point where I started going in and out of psychoses, completely losing the ability to distinguish between my waking life and my dream world that I was creating. And things got pretty wild. Like sometimes they were very exciting hallucinations and delusions. At one point I thought I was some sort of like secret agent. My wife was Harry Matheson from Homeland, who had been sent to save me, this secret CIA agent. And there's this whole plot that if anybody's ever seen A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, that movie does a really good job of depicting a psychosis from the perspective of the person in a psychosis, where you create this whole fictional world around you to support your delusions. And from the outside, it's all complete nonsense. But you're unable to see that. But anyway, I was eventually medically retired. I ended up getting that same treatment through the VA, and I found myself in a very dark, depressed place, suicidal, just a wreck of a human being. And I had gone from being, as a 20-some-year-old guy flying F-18s at the top of my career with everything that you could think you could want, to now I was unable to do the dishes. I couldn't read a paragraph in a book without forgetting it. I was distancing myself from my friends, my family, and I just found myself in this dark, dark hole.
Yeah, so it's almost like, in naval aviation, we use the analogy of the Swiss cheese, right? If you get all the holes aligned, you'll create the perfect storm for something really bad to happen. And at any given point, it seems like if they would have just stopped, and I think we know more now in 2025 than we did when this happened to you, but it's tragic that you had to go through this. Hopefully we can we have more insight to stop it. But it's like if they had just stopped at any given point and taking a look at the case as a whole, they that they would have realized that this is not a psychological issue. It's very frustrating to see so many veterans struggling with these things, and we keep being labeled as we have PTSD when what we have is a brain injury. Looking back at that, does that piss you off?
For a long time, I had a lot of bitterness. I felt deeply betrayed by the government that I had served. I felt I had been poisoned effectively through the pills that they were giving me that drove me into deeper and deeper psychoses, to the point I ended up living in a mental hospital run by the VA, where I just saw absolute abysmal treatment of American veterans in that place. I mean, the same things that you would do to somebody in a prisoner of war situation: sleep deprivation, malnourishment, confinement, being treated less than human. Now, you take a perfectly healthy military member and you put them through survival training. Within a few days of that kind of treatment, sleep deprivation especially, healthy people will start to have visual auditory hallucinations and delusional thinking. Now, at the treatment facilities that are supposed to help you get better from mental health conditions, those are the same things that they're doing to you. Every 15 minutes, if you're on one-to-one care, you get woken up with a flashlight in your face. You are already in a hard place to sleep with other people dealing with psychoses. There's other people in and out of your room all night. Everything is hard tile floors and concrete walls, so everything echoes. There's people yelling and screaming in the hallways all night, so you're not getting restful sleep. The food is ultra processed garbage prison food. And actually, people who had been in and out of the prison system that I had met in this facility said they'd rather be in federal prison because the food and the treatment of people in federal prison is actually better than the treatment of American veterans in these VA psych facilities.
I love to pick on the VA. It's just it's part of what I do, and not everything the VA does is bad. There's so many things that they do well. I think healthcare is not on that list. Um, we take our heroes who have put themselves in the line of fire, and we treat them like that. It's mind-boggling to me. How walk us through how you were able to finally get out of there, because I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, I spent 40 days in that facility before my family was able to advocate to get me out, with the support of my wife, who's an ER nurse who had dealt with psychotic patients before, the support of my mom, who's a physician, my father, who worked in healthcare. They were able to advocate and say, hey, we have a place to take him that's going to be better than this facility. Please release him into our custody, which was actually a bit of a battle to get me out of there. But with their support, they were able to get me out of that facility, back to my home, back with my children, my wife, back outside. But I was so broken after I came out of there. I was worse off than when I went in. I was on more medications at higher dosages than when I went in. And I was just dark, bitter, angry. The only emotion I could feel was just this burning rage. And I was at that point where I was ready to be the guy who went into the VA with a machine gun and shot everybody up. Like I was in that mindset because of the way I saw the system. I had fallen through the cracks of the veneer of our society, and I had seen this dark underbelly. And I was very fortunate to come across a book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. I wasn't able to read more than about a paragraph at a time without forgetting it, but between the audiobook and reading it, I was able to retain enough that I got the idea that, hey, there might be this other way ahead through the use of psychedelic assisted therapy. And so I sought that out through the network of nonprofit organizations that are out there, kind of picking up the slack where the VA is failing the veterans, and actually providing these modalities that help heal the brain and the soul, and get people back on their feet with a sense of purpose and drive, and create neuroregeneration to heal the brain. And over the course of about a 2 year of going through several of these types of treatment, through nutraceutical protocols, through psychedelic assisted therapy, through traumatic brain injury clinics, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a whole list of effective modalities that are not available through conventional insurance or the VA, were what actually brought me back. And rebuilding a healthy lifestyle at a foundation of all that was really the most crucial part, which was prioritizing 7.5 to 8 hours of restful sleep a night, eating good food, drinking clean water, getting in touch with nature, community, exercise, all these foundations of like basically like what our grandparents used to tell us. Like, here's the secret to good health is the simple things in life. And that's what I was able to rebuild, largely in a big part due to the modalities that I was able to gain access to rediscover myself and rebuild myself.
Yeah, I think one of the important things about your story is the necessity of community and making that happen. This must have been really really tough on your family and your children. And I've watched a couple other podcasts with you, and your book came out, and this isn't the first time this has been mentioned. But what if your wife and your family, what if they didn't have a healthcare background? Like, how would they have gotten you out of there? Which leads me to how many people are stuck in there that will never get out.
Yeah, it's a rough place to be stuck. I mean, I was voluntarily admitted there. I hadn't committed any crimes, but after I tried to escape from that facility because they wouldn't let me go home when I wanted to go home, and all that, all I saw what they were doing was they were just increasing the amount of drugs that I had to take every day. And when you don't comply in the facility, what they did is they forcibly injected me with a medication called Haldol, which should just be called hell because it made me feel like there were insects crawling their way out from underneath my skin. All I wanted to do was tear them off my own flesh and run up and down the hallways screaming at the top of my lungs. Eventually, I came to in a room with this woman that was supposed to be my legal representation. She had a pen in my hand, and I was literally drooling on myself and scribbling on these documents that one, they committed me to the facility, they stripped me of my constitutional right to bear arms, and they put me on the law enforcement information network as if I had committed a felony. So if I'm ever pulled over by the police, I pop up in their network like a criminal.
Is that still the case?
Yes. Yes, there's a long process. I mean, this is years ago now, but it's permanent unless you go through a whole bureaucratic nightmare to get it reversed. But there's so many guys in there that I saw, guys and gals. I mean, my facility it's divided. You know, they keep women on one side and men on the other. But there are men and women who've served our country honorably that are trapped in those facilities indefinitely. And when they commit you to that facility, even if in my case I hadn't done anything wrong except wanted to go home and they wouldn't let me, and I didn't want to take the medications they were trying to force on me because I saw what they were doing to me. They were just numbing me and making me worse, and I didn't want that. But no one listens to you when they think you're completely crazy. Which I made a pretty good case for by being in and out of psychoses while in that facility. But there were guys in there that had been forced into electroconvulsion therapy where they would hook up electrodes and shock them forcibly, which God knows what that does to their brain. There are other people with patchworks of scars all over their head from all sorts of experimental brain surgeries they were doing to these people. And these are the things I'm talking about from lucid moments. These aren't things that were from my imagination when I was in there, but it's truly abysmal treatment of human beings in that kind of healthcare facility. And it's not doing anything to actually heal the person. It oftentimes just makes you far, far worse.
It's amazing to me that it's even allowed to continue. Like what you're describing sounds like something that might have come out of the 1800s.
It's almost more brutal because it's all masked and disguised in a way that the optics of it all, once in a while they come by and they give everybody Oreos and Nutter Butters and, oh, there's pretty little pictures on the wall and everything's clean and tidy. But underneath this veneer surface of it all, it is a torturous experience to be put into those facilities. And it's abusive. It's abusive to the people that get put into them. And it's not fixing people, and we know it. Our understanding of traumatic brain injury has gotten much, much better, but there's a lot of intentional effort to ignore that fact for a number of reasons. And the pharmaceutical industry uses the VA as a cash cow for them. They get to dictate many of the policies that are put in place. And so the policies that get put in place favor the use of their medications, which are designed around a business model to put you on a pill and to keep you on that pill and add more and more to it that you have to take for the rest of your existence. And oh, by the way, there's going to be side effects, but the good thing is they make a pill for that side effect. And it just builds and builds. And meanwhile, the patient continues to suffer and get worse and worse, and they profit off of you all the way to your grave.
It's shameful on levels that we can't even like get to. My gosh, I'm so glad that you're still here and that you found a way through. Um, let's talk a little bit about psychedelics. It's one of my favorite topics. In addition to, naturopathic medicine and like everything that you said is everything that I love: food, medicine, sleep, community, family, nature. Um, but I think psychedelics were a big part of how you healed. You can do a traumatic brain injury protocol that has fish oil and ALA and, phosphatidylserine and all those things, but it's very slow. I, one of my questions I'm curious about is, so you launched into these ceremonies. What kind of resistance did you get from people around you, if at all?
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of skepticism from my own family and especially the VA. My psychiatrists and psychologists, they wanted nothing for me to do with that. And the idea of someone coming off their medications so that they can go and take some sort of psychedelic is, to them, I mean, we get kind of conditioned to believe, like, if you're somebody that's dealing with mental health issues and you come off your medication, you're going to go crazy and it's going to be the end of the world. Well, that's not necessarily true if you can rebuild a foundation of health as you do so intelligently. But there was actually a lot of resistance, and especially from my own family. They're like, no, they're all from the conventional healthcare system. They had worked there, between being a nurse and a physician. Like, they were very much indoctrinated into that system at that point. But I was going to do it either way, with or without their support. And even when I came back from my first big psychedelic experience, they were still very much skeptical. They thought maybe I was just being manic. Like, this is a high that he's on right now, but he's going to crash back off of it before long, and then we're going to be far worse off. But as time went on, I continued. It wasn't linear, but little by little, it was getting better and better as a general trajectory. And there were good days and there were bad days. And it took years of integrating that psychedelic experience. But what that did is it opened my eyes to the insanity that it was to continue taking these pills that were making me worse and worse. It reset my default node network so I could build new habit patterns. To use Michael Pollan's analogy, it was like this fresh layer of snowfall over all these ruts of negative emotions and behaviors that had just become who I was. And with this sort of fresh snowfall over all those ruts, I was able to take a new line in my life, one of optimism, positivity. I wasn't stuck in anger and rage all day, every day anymore. I'd gotten out of that rut. And as time progressed, with the addition of the traumatic brain injury consultations, the nutraceuticals, all these other modalities in conjunction with the psychedelics, really just turned my life around. And I was fortunate to get to experience a number of different psychedelics, initially just starting with psilocybin, then ayahuasca through Native American, or through Shipibo people down in Peru that I gained access to through Heroic Hearts Project. And then later, I was actually able, with you, we went down to Costa Rica with No Fallen Heroes, and I experienced Iboga, which was really the most profound psychedelic experience that I had. While ayahuasca was certainly this massively heart expansive, opening experience that opened my heart back up after having these walls and walls of armor that had built up over the time. It kind of broke that all down so I could feel again and feel love again and feel warmth and positivity. But the iboga really got into much deeper things that were in there, and and the neuroregenerative properties of that medicine in particular are phenomenal. The way that can cause neuroregeneration is, I don't know that there's any medicine that can do anything nearly as well as iboga.
It's pretty profound, and I remember from my own experiences. I'm glad I didn't do Iboga first. I tried MDMA first, and that opened my heart, which was a big part of the process. But like you, I think Iboga was like I wouldn't be having a podcast right now if I hadn't done Iboga. Mushrooms are nice, but there's something that's special about it. I hope that we can get more research done. The way I've been describing it to people is when you first go into the medicine, This is what it feels like for me. I don't know if you have a similar experience, but I feel like it's when you go to Jiffy Lube, right? And you drive your car in and you give the guy your keys and he takes your car and he goes and does something with it. You hear noises, you're in the waiting room and you hear drills and things going on. And then you get the bill and you get your keys back and you drive your car out and it's better. I feel like the medicine does something in the beginning stages of that medicine journey that is very neurological. And then the mystical experience comes at the end, but it's always that hard part at the beginning for me where I pull my car into Jiffy Lube and it's doing some sort of magic to my brain that is actually quite uncomfortable. And yet you come out of it and you're like, I'm a completely different person. Thank you, Jiffy Lube. But uh, so you've done the iboga. You did you go on to do more journeys after that?
Um, this past fall, I did a bufo ceremony, but I found as I progressed through this that I've needed less and less medicine, and more I've replaced it with just a really healthy lifestyle, meditation, breath work, sauna and cold plunge, like a lot of holistic modalities that I can just do at my house without any sort of medicine. And that's kind of been my goal, is to just get where I don't need anything anymore. I don't need pills. I don't need psychedelic experiences. I think I'll always have a bit of a curiosity about the psychedelic experiences, and maybe every year or so I'll want to, kind of do a little reboot of it and re-experience that. But I think people can also get so hooked on that experience that they start chasing that experience. But the experience of it isn't really the point. It's what you learn from that experience and put into your life, into practice. And that's what's really important. And I'm getting to the point with my meditation practice now that I can get to those same places without any medicine in my body at all, because it's been there all along. It's at the core of who we are. But I'm very grateful for those experiences, and I'm certain I'll have at least a few more medicine journeys in my life, because I think it's incredibly healthy for people to do on occasion.
I think that's a testament to your ability to do the integration, because I've noticed the same thing as I go on to the medicine. I need it less, and there have been some times where like I don't actually think I want to do this right now. But that comes with integration and working with all the stuff that you get, and then rebuilding. It's not enough to have the snow over the old tracks. You've got to do the work to actually build the new tracks, right?
Absolutely, and that's where the real work comes in. You get this experience that can be oftentimes very brutal, physically and mentally and emotionally, and then you come out feeling amazing, but now you have to integrate that experience into your life and your new perspective, and it completely changes how you view everything. But if you just go back into your old ways and your old habit patterns, it can very quickly vanish, and you can find yourself back in the same place, or even reinforcing negative neural pathways that were there. Um, but if you integrate that experience in a positive way, and you build a new lifestyle in a healthy way, it's profound, the long-term effects that it can have just from a single medicine experience.
Yeah, integration. I love doing integration, and I love doing integration in different ways. Before we started recording the podcast, Smurf and I were talking about woodworking, and he told me that he built that surfboard that's in his backdrop there. Um, so, why don't you share a little bit about what integration looked like for you, in addition to building surfboards?
Yeah, it's really, you get this opportunity to rebuild yourself however you want to be when you come out of one of these heavy medicine experiences. And you don't have to do everything perfectly. It takes time and patience and rebuilding habitual patterns, but it gives you this opportunity after that reset to rebuild new habit patterns. But things that I really started to focus on were, I've always eaten fairly healthy, but I really cleaned up my diet to just all whole foods. I don't eat anything hardly ever, unless I'm like on a road trip and I'm forced to eat at the airport, and I just got to find something so I don't pass out because I'm so hungry. But most of the time, I just eat whole foods, which means, that can mean whatever you want, as long as it's as close to the natural version of that food as possible and minimally processed. That's what you want. If you can get it from a local farmer that has grown it or raised that animal, or whatever it may be, and they do so without the use of herbicides and pesticides and poisoning the soil and mistreating the animals. Like, when you eat healthy food it makes you healthy. If you eat food that has been nutrient deprived, that's been coated in Roundup and grown out of soils that have no microorganisms remaining in them, you're going to not get all the nutrients that you need to be healthy and flourish. So I found that was a really big one, was just putting good nurturing food into my body consistently, drinking clean water. So investing in some sort of water filtration system. I live in northern Michigan where we probably have some of the cleanest water, but even here there is junk that gets into the groundwater that you want to get out of there. So having some sort of filtration system in your house, be it reverse osmosis or distillation, and then remineralizing that water after it's filtered, is really important. And I don't drink much other than just clean water. Cutting out alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, minimizing caffeine at least goes a long ways. And that gets me to sleep, which is probably the single most important thing that we do to heal and to maintain our vibrancy and health, is just getting restful sleep. Now, if you drink caffeine, even if it's just one cup of coffee in the morning, it has a half-life of 12 hours. So that means in the middle of the night, some of that caffeine is still active in your system and it's not allowing you to get into as deep of a sleep. So if you're habitually drinking caffeine, which I was a caffeine fiend, like I still love coffee. I just love the flavor of it, the ritual of it. But by cutting out caffeine for a while, it really helped my sleep improve. Um, Cutting out alcohol, even just a drink or two of alcohol, really diminishes your restful sleep. You don't get into nearly as deep a sleep with that. And this goes for all sorts of different substances that are out there. And if you're somebody who's starting to struggle with some health issues or mental health issues, I cannot tell you how much it helps just to cut out those simple things as much as possible. And again, you don't have to be perfect. If once in a while you want to have a beer with a friend or whatever, you got to get up really early one day and you just want to have that cup of coffee, go for it. You don't have to be perfect in your integration experience, but the more of these habits that can just become your baseline, the better off you're going to be. There's a really good book called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. And I highly recommend that to anybody interested in learning about how vital your sleep is.
It's one of my favorite books. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Love it.
Another really good one I just read is called Good Energy, by Callie and Casey Means, that goes into just how to get your cells really healthy and the amazing power of our body and our cells to heal themselves. And if we can just stop poisoning ourselves, it's amazing how much we can heal through everything. I kind of got off on a tangent there, but I hope that answers at least a little bit of the integration process with just your basic habits.
I think you covered a really important point in that, if you're gonna if you want to thrive, right? So this whole podcast is about how we can take complex or give people with complex medical conditions a reason to hope. And one of the first steps is, I actually start with sleep, and then water, and then nutrition. But um, I think it's a testament to how you healed your brain, because it wasn't just the psychedelics and it wasn't just getting off the medications, although those are two very important steps. But you're a walking miracle, man. And I think one of the points I take away from your story is, number one, the intrinsic drive and desire to keep seeking and keep looking for a solution to what is happening. And the second thing is patience and letting those things work, because these are not, clean water and sleep are not quick medicines. They're slow and they work over time. As you're like the perfect combination of everything that I love about conventional medicine, which is trauma medicine. Like, you wouldn't be here if they hadn't been able to sew you back together and put in the metal rods. And I'm sure you must be a treat for TSA. Um, but you're also a poster child for all the things that naturopathy and alternative medicine talks about, which is sleep, diet, lifestyle, community, and frankly, self-acceptance, which I think is a big part of it. But I appreciate you sharing your story. With the last couple minutes, let's talk about your book. Tell me about your book.
Oops, I didn't realize I was muted there. So yeah, the book Phoenix Revival, it was something I started writing a few years back, and it took me about 9 months to get through the initial manuscript, just to have a rough draft of it. But after my first big psychedelic experience with ayahuasca, I really saw that I had this wild story that needed to be shared because there's so many people that go through these sort of struggles and in silence. And while I have this sort of big flashy ejection story at the beginning that gets people's attention, the mental health struggles are something that every single human deals with at some point in their life. That's just part of the human experience. And I wanted to share that so people know this is normal. No matter who you are, no matter what your experience is, no matter what your job is, we all go through these struggles. And at the end of the day, we're all human. But at the same time, you don't have to be you don't have to be a superhuman to get through it. We have everything we need to get through these things, and it's often very holistic and it's from within us. And I wanted to share that hope so that I could be that light that I wish I had when I was stuck in that dark pit and was being told that there's no way forward. There's no way to get better by the conventional medical system where they're like, you just have to take these pills for the rest of your days. And that's your only option. I want to be that. I want to be that light for other people so that they don't have to go through what I did and be stuck in that darkness as long as I was. And so that's what really motivated me to write this book. It was a very therapeutic experience of writing all this stuff down in vivid detail and getting to the roots of these emotions that I think was better than going to see a psychologist at any rate. And so then I discovered that getting a book published is actually more work than writing the book. And so that took another about a year and a half of exploring different options from traditional publishers to self-publishing. I ended up finding a hybrid publisher, which is kind of the best of both worlds of self-publishing and going with a big publisher. And that's how we got it out to the world. It just released in January of this year, and it's available on Amazon. It's probably the best place to get it. You can get it in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and it's also on Audible. I read the Audible for that one.
That's fantastic. I love it. Did you make it to the top of the bestseller? Did I see that you hit some categories?
Yeah, it was an Amazon bestseller, so officially a best-selling book. I found to become a New York Times bestseller, you have to write $100,000 check to the New York Times. So I probably won't be getting on that list anytime soon, but on Amazon, at least, it's a bestseller officially.
Well, I for one, am glad you shared it. I think the so many veterans out there, and I mean, veterans, I focus on veterans because that's what we are, but lots of people have stories of being in the dark hole and the proverbial dark night of the soul and finding a way to climb out of that hole. And I think we need to see those stories. And I hope that more people like you share what those holistic ways they were to get themselves out of the hole. And I realized that it wasn't just you, that there were people who were putting a ladder down for you and helping you out. And that's important too. But it sounds a little silly, but I'm proud of you. I think the book is fantastic, and I hope it does really well, not just to sell a lot of copies, but to get the message out for hope and resilience.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, like you said, there's been a lot of people who've got me to this point. This wasn't just myself. I've been very blessed with the access to some of this healing modalities that I've gained. And I'm very thankful for this whole world of nonprofit organizations out there that's growing because we see that there's a broken healthcare system. And another project I'm working on now is called the Davis Hope Project. And we're rebuilding a medical system. It's a group of veterans, and we're trying to rebuild healthcare in a way that it should be. And it's starting with a nonprofit organization that's going to serve primarily veterans and active duty military. We're also trying to reframe this whole mental health issue as a brain health optimization so that people can gain access to it, even if they're active duty military, even if they have a flight clearance, even if they're on some high speed job with a security clearance. So people can focus on the optimization. And this is what the SEAL communities have been doing now for a while. But we need to apply that to the military in general, especially the strike fighter community where you're spending millions of dollars to train these pilots. Let's invest a little bit on getting their health optimized and keeping them and their brains working properly so that they have a longer career, are happier, healthier, better functioning people. It'll reduce mishaps. And then for the veterans coming out of the military, we want to put them on this pipeline that you and I have kind of had to struggle to find our way onto and discover that route ourselves. And the goal at the Davis Hope Project is to have the path all ready to go and to guide them through that. And it'll integrate the use of a lot of different nonprofits that are already in existence along that path. But we're going to at least get them into a pipeline, get them some labs done and see where things are off, and then get them started on that journey so that they can gain access to all the modalities that are out there with the proper guidance and a watchful eye over them as they go through, to get them out the other side so they can come back out and be a productive, happy, healthy human being to contribute to society once again.
That's awesome. In addition to the book and Amazon, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram at Kegan Smurf Gill, and you can also go to my website, kegangill.com. That's KEGANGILL.com. There you can find out how to get a hold of my book. You can get a hold of me if you're interested in hiring a motivational speaker. I've spent the past 2 years traveling all over the country doing motivational speaking. And I also just started a coaching service after several beta testing with people that were interested in it. I'm ready to serve people. If you want to go through your own journey, please reach out. I can help guide you on that path. But head over to kegangill.com. I'm also on LinkedIn under Kegan Gill if you're on LinkedIn. But please, if you have questions, feedback, anything, please reach out to me. I'm very accessible online.
Okay. One last question for you. Your nonprofit, is it actually stood up already?
It's in the process of being stood up right now. We just got some funding going, but it's in its infancy right now. But it won't be long, and we'll be looking for people to help donate to that project, because it's going to be revolutionary. And you know, we've seen the flaws in our healthcare system, and so we're gonna try to build it right. But you can check it out now. It's davishopeproject.com.
Fantastic. Well, if nothing else, I will see your posts on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I'll share whenever I see that stuff pop up, because I would love for that word to get out. All right. If you like what you heard here today and you like the alternative flight plan, we ask that you please like, subscribe, share, and do all the things to get social media out there so that we can share our message, not just for veterans, but for anybody that needs a helping hand with a life problem, right? Thanks so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate the help. I hope your book does well. And I think we're done. So we're going to go ahead and enter the pattern and bring it in for, well, it's a tomcat, right? So we're going to bring it in for the OK one wire.
Sweet.
All right. Thanks for sharing all those tips. If you are looking for ways in your own life to integrate alternative medicine into your medical team or your lifestyle, we hope that you follow along, like, subscribe, share, and tune in each week for those tips.